So let's talk about the compounding regulations. One of the things that I can tell you is that you don't need to remember all of this. What you do need to remember is where to go to get the information. And I have to tell you that in all the things that I do and all the things that I have to know, there certainly is no way that in my noggin that I can remember all those things. And I certainly don't want to have to memorize all those things, because to me, when you are working with things as important as what this is, that you have a medicine, that you have something that you are creating for a patient to consume, and you could put them at risk, I don't want to go on memorization, but knowing where to find that. And I was very happy with the fact that it was easy to go through and to look up this information on the internet. Chapter 795 in the USPNF gives you complete description of guidance for non-sterile preparations. It gives you the guidance and the direction on the processes involved with these non-sterile preparations. And to give you an idea as to what's in this particular chapter is we have an introduction. So of course this is going to give you kind of a quick outline as to what it is that you're going to be looking at. It gives you a definition. It gives you categories of compounding and then a description of what those categories are. It gives you the responsibilities of you, the compounder, what you have to do, and then what the compounding process is. How about compounding facilities? Maybe you don't know whether or not you're in a compounding facility. This gives you that information. What type of equipment is going to be used in compounding? The stability criteria in the beyond use date, which becomes very important because we have to be able to put some type of an expiration date on that product. The packaging and drug preparation containers, some will have very, very specific requirements. Any type of documentation that's going to go with this. So everything that you've done has to be documented appropriately. What you've done for quality control, any patient counseling that has to be done, and any training. And it even gives information, if you happen to go into the veterinarian industry, of compounding for animal patients as well. So let's talk a little bit about these compounding regulations. The USP establishes standards of quality, strength, purity, packaging, and labeling for medications. They're widely acknowledged and scientifically sound procedures and practices. They just didn't one night decide that they're going to write this book and write all this information up without having this stuff tested first. The FDA generally defers to the state to regulate the practice of the pharmacy. But the FDA does have limited oversight over compounding, but may still enforce the USP's compounding standards. And that's one of the reasons why it becomes so important. Because the FDA can't always be in a position to have the oversight over this, but they can look at what the USP standards are and determine whether or not they've been met. The products then all have to be dispensed by a prescription. So what about the personnel? The standard gives the responsibility and the authority of the management in the compounding area to the pharmacist. You're going to have this information in Chapter 795. It also is going to talk about the facilities and the equipment. They specify that the compounding area, either non-sterile or sterile, is going to be in a designated area away from the routine dispensing and counseling functions of high-traffic areas within the pharmacy. So we know exactly if, in fact, we were building a pharmacy, where this compounding would have to come in and where it would have to be located. This allows limited access to the medications, keeping that contamination of the product to a bare minimum. I've mentioned this before in a couple of the lectures of thinking about that if you were going into a restaurant and you had people in the kitchen doing food preparation. You certainly don't want all of the customers, all of the wait staff, everybody moving back and forth across in that kitchen area, because then you have a higher risk of that food becoming contaminated. Well, this runs along the same thing. These are compounding agents that you are making for the consumption or the use within a patient, and you want to make sure that you are keeping them as sterile as possible. As far as ingredient standards, raw chemicals are supplied in many levels of purity. Now, it's desired that the USP or the NF grade be the lowest grade purity used in compounding, and that if the grade is not available, then a higher grade of purity can be used if deemed acceptable by the pharmacist. In this example that we have here, these are ingredients. And as we can see, we have a list of ingredients and then the processes. These processes then are identified by alpha characterization. The C is for identifying chemical synthesis, where the F is for fermentation, and then the B is biological or natural extraction. Bulk ingredients are active drug substances that are used to manufacture dosage form products. Drugs are substances with active pharmacological properties in humans and in animals. And drugs are compounded with other materials such as pharmaceutical necessities to produce a medicinal product for patient use. Excipients are inert ingredients which are combined with drug substances to create a dosage form product. But what is excipient? What does that mean? Well, the medical dictionary describes an excipient as a usually inert substance, such as a gum arabic, a syrup, a lanolin, or a starch, that forms a vehicle, such as a drug or an antigen, especially one that in the presence of sufficient liquid gives a medicated mixture the adhesive quality needed for the preparation of pills and tablets. So exactly what does this translate into for us? Well, this is all the extra added stuff. So think about it again going back to baking. You want to have a chocolate cake. Okay, well, you need the chocolate. Okay, that's going to be the main thing, and you're going to have your flour and sugar. But you need to have extra stuff in there that you're not necessarily going to recognize or taste, but they're going to be things such as your egg, maybe your oil, your baking powder, baking soda, maybe a touch of vanilla. These are all things that are going to act together to create an end product. Well, in this case, we have raw products, and we need to be able to adhere these together. So we have to have these extra ingredients. This is sometimes also where patients can have reactions to these, where they find one medication or one brand of a medication will work and maybe another one doesn't. Excipients may affect the rate of absorption, the dissolution, the metabolism, and the distribution in both humans and in animals. So it does play a role in that, and again, that's why we have some medications that work very well and maybe the off-brands don't. As the prescription is being compounded, we need to read and interpret the prescription. So we get out that old book, we start to look through that and make sure that we're reading through the processes. Think of that as one of a cookbook, all right? We need to determine the preliminary compounding procedure. Again, using the USP-NF book, we're going to collect and prepare the required ingredients, the drugs, supplies, equipment, and protective clothing. We need to make sure that we have all of those ready, because then we need to check for expiration dates. We need to identify whether or not the purity of those products meet those necessary standards. And then package in the formulation in the appropriate container in order to affix the appropriate labels and perform quality control procedures. This is an entire process that goes through, and having these steps in place so we don't get in and start getting ready to mix something and go, oh, this is expired, I need to go get such, and then you find out that you don't have any more of it. Or to find out that, oh, I need this, and maybe you don't have any, or in the meantime, that particular product has become contaminated in some way, shape, or form. The goal is to facilitate the delivery of a consistent and good quality prepared medicines to patients. Isn't that what it should be? We want to make sure that they get something that is going to be of good quality. It's going to be of the right consistency, the right level of medication. And by doing this, there's a couple processes that we can go through: quality assurance and quality control. Just like with anything, we have to go back and we need to make sure that what we've done is correct. Quality assurance is a program of activities that's used to assure that the procedures used in compounding a product lead to products that comply with specifications and standards. Well, the quality control then is a set of testing procedures that determine the quality of the compound formulation. Materials that are used in compounding should be stored according to the manufacturer's labeling or the USP/NF requirements. Materials need to be marked with the date of receipt and the date the container is opened, and the materials should be rotated to the oldest stock first. So this is going to be important, especially when you're going through and doing stock of any kind, that you're taking that oldest product, making sure that's coming forward and any of the new product is going to the back. But again, making sure that we are checking for those expiration dates. Materials should not be used beyond their expiration date. Materials that specify storage temperatures need to use the definitions listed in the following table. In this particular example here, we have temperature storage. We see everything from freezer, cold, refrigerator, room temperature. And if your product that you are using identifies any of these, we need to make sure that we adhere to those. We also have label regulations. In this particular example that we have here, it's showing C2. This means that this is a Class 2 drug that has been used in this compounding product. This is something that would be enforceable. So in the Chapter 795, there is documentation and record-keeping guidelines that are listed there. But what is it that we have to write down? Well, what this documentation is going to do is provide information that is directly applicable to the formulation being compounded. So it's basically what you did on a step-by-step basis. It provides consistency when formulations are compounded over and over again. So if in fact you have to go back and you need to make that all over again, you have something to identify with. It's kind of like writing a recipe, right? You have this, it gives you instructions as to how to do it. Maybe you need to tweak it one way or the other. It provides a mechanism to systematically review procedures and ingredients if there's a problem with the formulation. Remember, I talked about quality assurance and quality control. If there's a problem, we can go back and we can look at those steps that were documented and find out, oops, we missed a step. And hopefully that oops is happened to be found prior to that going to the patient. These documentation and record-keeping guidelines recommend that 4 sets of records be kept in the compounding area. Now that seems very excessive, but let's take a look at what they are and the reason for them. A formulation record. This is compounding formulas and procedures. There's a master sheet there, or, as I said, a recipe. What should happen when the formulation is compounded? So if you mix this and this together, you should get a green goo. Well, if you don't get a green goo, there's something that's happened. You've done something wrong. The compounding record is what actually happens when the formulation was compounded. So again, giving identification that, if you mix these things together, this should be what the final outcome is. The third piece of documentation deals with the standard operating procedures. For equipment maintenance, equipment calibration, handling and disposal of supplies. We need to make sure that the equipment is being maintained, that the calibrations have been set correctly, that you've disposed of what you need to appropriately. And then the final one is the ingredient records. So if, for any reason there was a quality control that was being done and they needed to verify the purity of the products that were used, this ingredient records identifies that where certificates of purity and the MSDS, which is the material safety data sheets, can be found. Now, after this compounding is all said and done, what we do need to know is the stability of the product. Stability is identified or defined to the extent in which a dosage form retains the same properties and characteristics, and that's throughout the period of storage and its use, and it's possessed at the time of its manufacture. So if we make something today, we need to know that it's going to last for a week or for 10 days or maybe for 30 days, depending on how long this patient is supposed to be using this. Now, in the absence of the length of stability information, or what's better known as a beyond use date, is going to be assigned. A beyond use date is different from that of a drug expiration date. Okay, we can't use drug expiration dates because now that the properties have been compounded together, we don't know that those two properties together are going to have the same stability for the length of time. And if you have something that maybe doesn't expire for a year, that doesn't mean that after it's combined with something else that it's going to stay stable for another year of time. It's not possible for the pharmacist to use that expiration date from a compounded formulation. So that's why we use the beyond use date. Always use appropriate documentation in literature from the USP/NF for examples to determine what that beyond use date is. Now, typically for water-containing formulations, these are things made from powders or solids. If the length of stability information is unavailable, a beyond use date of a standard 14 days is assigned. Okay, again, this is not information that you have to absolutely memorize, but knowing where to get this information. Chapter 795 of the USP/NF. After we get done compounding, we need to go through and do a quality control. We need to recheck our work. We need to know that the compound formulation is new to the pharmacist. We need to keep a sample and make a second batch to assess its stability and appearance over the expected time frame of therapy. So if you have something that you're making that's new, you need to make sure that you make enough that you have this sample batch so that you can watch that and make sure that that stays stable. Again, making sure that we have documented the compounding process. You're going to deliver the product to the patient with the appropriate consultation and return ingredients, supplies, making sure that the equipment has been taken care of. We're going to return all these ingredients to their proper locations. If in fact you find that there needs to be maintenance done on any of the equipment, basically it's time to clean up. You got all the stuff out, now you have to put it away and clean it up, making sure that you've disposed of any personal protective gear appropriately. So these are all things to keep in mind. We want to make sure it's as clean, when you leave as it was when you got there.